Good afternoon and welcome to the Overview and Scrutiny Management Committee. Would the members of the panel like to introduce themselves, please?
Andrew Marchington, Chair of the Children's Scrutiny Panel.
Habib Anzaman, Chair of Adult and Health and Social Care Panel.
Harpreet Uppal, Chair of the Economies and Neighbourhood Panel.
Andrew Cooper, Chair of the Corporate Scrutiny Panel.
And I'm Liz Smagecott, Chair of the Management Committee. Membership of the committee, there are no apologies. Minutes of the previous meeting, do we agree them as a true record? Are there any matters arising from the minutes? No? Okay. Does any councillors wish to declare any interests? No? All matters will be taken in public today. Do we have any deputations or petitions or public questions? No? Right, Councillor Pandor is here to provide us with an update on his portfolio priorities. Councillor Pandor, you came in September and gave us the priorities that you had for this year, and you're here today to update on those. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and I'm happy to be here again. It seems like, I was only here yesterday. Time flies, but that's the nature of the job. The job like mine, time does fly very, very quickly. Chair, what I don't want to do is, I don't want to talk too much, but I will try and keep it very brief and to the point, and I'll be happy to take questions at the end. A few key highlights. Firstly, the budget that we approved last February was a series of measures that we are taking to actually fulfil my priorities. We continue to invest in the council as we move forward. But having said that, we are still one of the worst funded councils nationally. So although there's a lot of good news in there, we are still facing a lot of issues around funding to make sure that we actually invest in the areas that I'm going to talk about. And this is all in the back of a funding review that's going to take place, the comprehensive spending review, and along with other leaders up and down the country on a cross-party basis, we are trying to get the best deal for local government because it's local government that actually are the front line of services. The budget had three key areas. The first area was regeneration, and that place-based stuff that we actually all so familiar with. And there was a lot of resources that's gone in. For example, £15 million back into road infrastructure for unclassified roads. Climate change, I'll talk about that in a bit more detail later on. And the third priority was children's services, which I'll talk to in a little more detail. Despite the last 10 years of having major financial pressures and austerity, I think it's a tide that's turning in terms of how we've actually managed to secure our financial position over the last 10 years. And now it's time to invest, and I think that's the best thing we can do. Also, nationally, the government's making a lot of noise, and they actually are committed to actually turn the tide around to actually put some money back into local communities via devolution, and that's a topic I'll come across in a minute as well. Firstly, in terms of what we are doing to actually make all this work at a local level, one of the key priorities for me is to actually make sure that we actually get that place-based working right. Councillors are at the heart of our communities. More and more challenges are coming through. I know that a lot of councillors in this room have actually started to develop local plans, and that will continue in terms of delivering the priorities of our residents, and the only way you can do that is to work in partnership with local communities. The other issue I want to talk about is towns and villages and the Dewsbury Blueprint, which was launched this year, and last year we launched the Huddersfield Master Plan. But this is not the end, because in the budget we've actually identified a further £78 million that will actually continue to invest in our towns and villages. So the progress is being made to make sure that we start to address not just issues in Huddersfield and Dewsbury, but also other towns, and not least Batley. I thought I'd mention that because I'm a councillor in Batley, and I don't want to be criticised that you've forgotten Batley or Murfield for that matter. But anyway, so this is a major turning the tide. We've also got some big plans in place through the Combined Authority in terms of new infrastructure money that's coming through, and the transparent upgrade will actually see a £1 billion investment in Kirklees alone, which is a massive investment in our towns and in Kirklees. An example of how we're actually spending our money in terms of developing our capital plan is Spen Valley Leisure Centre. Work on site has commenced, a scheme that's totaling £30 million. The other priority is the housing delivery. I actually launched the Big Build event in September 2019 to build 10,000 new homes by 2023. That's going really well and it's going to plan. We've engaged with over 100 organisations, both developers and financiers, to actually start to develop our plan. 41 council-owned sites have actually been identified, and we are already in pipeline to actually deliver on the schemes. I don't have the numbers with me, just in case you ask, but I can get the numbers, and I've been assured that we will actually deliver them homes by the time that we've actually indicated. Climate emergency is a big issue. It's an issue that's actually not just something that we should be concerned about locally, but it's a global issue. That's why I'm really pleased that I reported back very recently to the climate emergency conference that was held a week ago, and at that I just explained what we're doing in the council. So in January 2019 we passed a cross-party motion on climate emergency. November last year we saw the working party report back, and in February we actually took that further by investing in our communities. And an example of that is £1 million to install 5 new rapid charging points and between 80 and 100 new fast charge points in public car parks. Also, we'll be adding to our current network in terms of rapid charging and 22 slow to fast charging in the public domain. A further £1 million to add an extra 50 new electric vehicles in our own fleet. And we're actually also going to be investing in small electric vans. I think there's about 20 that's planned, which will include 30 hybrid cars and 24 small electric vans. We're investing £700,000 over the next 12 months around trees and woodland, and the work is ongoing. There's some work that's going to be programmed into the Climate Commission, Kirklees Climate Commission that's going to be set up. I'm sure Naheed will sort of talk about that in more detail, and my apologies because a couple of these items that I'm going through are actually detailed reports that are coming through. So it just shows that, you know, we are working together, and I'm just hopefully going to give you an overview. Children's services. We all know the journey that we've been on. A few years ago, we were inspected by Ofsted, and the report was very damning. We were failing our young people in Kirklees. I'm really pleased that we had an Ofsted report last year. We are special measures, and we are no longer inadequate. But having said that, we still do a lot more, because it's not good that I'm looking at, I think every child deserves our council to be outstanding, and that's where our journey continues to go on. And again, there was a lot of elements in the budget that we actually put in to actually make sure that that journey continues. We've also had a peer challenge report that was commissioned by the council. We asked LGA peers to come and inspect the work of the council, and they came back. There were some issues that we need to highlight and identify. But unless you actually have a complete and honest feedback, right? Yeah, we don't know how to improve, and that's very valuable in terms of moving forward. Flooding, and I think that's on the agenda as well. So I won't take too much of your time. But I think, firstly, Chair, it's important to recognise that our staff did a fantastic job. They were amazing. The police were amazing, the fire service, and the voluntary sector. And I would say that statutory services are the fourth emergency service, and our voluntary and community sector is the fifth emergency service, because if they didn't pull together, the situation would have been a lot worse. We were as badly hit as other places like in Leeds were and in Calderdale, but despite the fact that we are as bad as them, we've still put a lot of money back in to the businesses that were affected. The figures at the last count, there were 69 domestic properties that were affected and 40 businesses that were affected. And what we've done is we've actually developed a fund up to £750 to meet clean-up costs and council tax reductions for up to 3 months for households affected by flooding, and £3,000 for clean-ups for businesses that have been affected, and business rate relief as well for them companies. We know that the money that's available is not enough, like everywhere else, and that's why we continue to work with our other partners in West Yorkshire and with government to address the issue that we faced in the lower-lying levels of the Calder Valley, namely Murfield and Ravensthorpe, and we're going to be continuing to do that. A few issues have been highlighted on the back of this, namely our ambitions to develop housing. We've done everything we need to do in terms of the rules and the regulations that allow us to actually build on the so-called floodplains. But there's a fine balance. If government is saying that you've got all these targets to meet and you need to build these houses and they're okay in where we're building, then there's a trade-off between where we build. Do we build on brownfield, greenfield, green belt, or areas where there may be areas that are prone to flooding? So we're going to look at the whole thing as we speak. The officers that are working on this to actually look at mitigating any flood risks. Finally, Chair, devolution. You probably picked up in the papers that things are moving at a pace. I'm confident that the meetings we've had with the Treasury and the local government Minister Robert Jenrick and Simon Clark, we've had some really positive meetings. You know, they are treating us as one of the priorities. We are the only core city area, Leeds, that has not got a deal. And by not having a deal, we're letting our residents down. I'm hopeful on the 11th of March we will be announced part of the budget that will be announced in the Houses of Parliament. There's still a long way to go, but it's just minor detail that we're working up. So things are moving very fast. One thing I'll just let the panel know, that whatever deal is done, it will have to come back to this council, like it will have to do to other councils, and it will need to be ratified by the council to go forward. Happy to take questions. My apologies, Chair. There's a lot of information there, but I've tried to keep it very succinct.
Right then, panel have any questions? Councillor Cooper.
Such a lot of questions. Okay, I guess one of the things that is on my mind is the Heathrow judgment, and are we going to have to revise any of our priorities on climate change because of the Heathrow judgment? And have you had a look at the risks associated with that, but also the region? So that's one question. The 10,000 homes by 2023, good that those might get done, but I've got a real concern that the energy efficiency standards of those homes will not be that good because of the performance gap that's been identified between what's actually supposed to happen under building regulations and what actually does happen. And I just wonder if there's a way that we've gone about dealing with that. Electric vehicles, I understand we've got some hybrids, and I do wonder about that as a choice, because hybrids are both electric and petrol, and so I do wonder what it was about range issues with vehicles that couldn't be met with just straightforward electric vehicles, and why we needed hybrids instead of sort of normal straightforward electric vehicles. Where is it that range becomes an issue there? Devolution, well, a lot of concerns about that. I mean, devolution to me doesn't look like devolution. It looks like re-centralisation of power in another remote location with an elected mayor for covering 5-6 local authorities as opposed to coming direct from central government. So the real question is there, how will elected members be engaged and involved in that?
Okay, thank you, Andrew. Regarding the Heathrow judgment, that will have an impact. I don't know the details of the Heathrow judgment, and I'm not going to pretend that I know the full details. But whatever we do, one of the things that we need to actually be very, very clear about is whatever we do in our investment, it needs to be properly thought out, properly audited, and a proper impact assessment being done in terms of how that will have an impact on the climate. One of the things that's been very, very clear is there were some plans that were in the process of being developed for Leeds Bradford Airport. And my understanding is that they've been dropped, especially on the back of the campaigning and the lobbying. But not just that, but it's the right thing to do. You know, just because we have these plans, things have moved on. Things have moved on a long way, and we need to actually rethink. And the members who were at the launch of the Dewsbury Master Plan will recall that Bill Grimsey, who was a well-known national speaker, he's actually got a lot of experience on regeneration and town centres and business, did say that actually electric vehicles, be it hybrid or be electric 100%, is not the future, because you will still have that massive issue of congestion. And what he was saying was that the way he saw the world going is there won't be any cars. So I don't really want to get into the philosophical argument about is a hybrid better, or is electric vehicles better, or what do we need to do, because the argument's moving so fast that I would actually argue that are cars the best way moving forward. I'll probably sort of like rattle a lot of cages, right? Yeah, you know, not least my own kids, right? Yeah, we'll sort of like, oh no, we need our cars. But just giving you a very yeah, council vehicles, absolutely, yeah, absolutely.
Services get to houses, so they're going to
Yeah.
put a horse or something, I don't know.
Yeah, let me make my point, right? Yeah, just to clarify, Andrew's right. We've got 30 hybrid pool cars, and we've already commissioned them. But part of the budget deal was to actually introduce 20 electric vehicles and 24 small electric vehicles. So out of the complete fleet, majority of them will be electric. But what I would argue is actually, you know, you need to actually completely rethink how we're moving forward, and that's what I'm saying. In terms of what the future is out there, there's a lot more debates that are taking place. But I take your point, Andrew. Why have a hybrid right here when it's not 100% green? If that's what, you understand that. In terms of housing, I understand what Andrew's saying. And one of the things that we're doing is developing a demonstrator project around a scheme for passive houses. That will give us enough information, because at the moment it's quite a difficult balance to strike, costs versus, you know, affordability versus a massive increase in housing crisis, and how do we actually square that up? You know, my view is, right, yeah, if you and even if you can square that up, right, yeah, how do we get people to actually understand by living in a passive house, right? Yeah, your maintenance is very different. How you actually, you know, go about doing your normal business is very different. You know, and it's a complete different concept. So even by having 100% passive house standards and 100% passive house houses, it's a complete different way of how the customer, how the residents will actually go about. But I take your point, Andrew, and there's a massive debate going on. I don't want to go into that debate in terms of the costs. You know my view. If we can have passive houses there tomorrow, I'd go for it. But if the evidence is telling me otherwise, I need to keep a balance. And finally, Chair, devolution. The ideal solution would be to have an assembly like London, like a regional assembly. But, you know, one of the things that motivates me to actually make sure that we do a deal is we have a government finally was actually saying we want to do a deal. Boris Johnson came up some time ago, he gave his commitment, he's putting his money where his mouth is, and I would urge every single member of this council right here to actually have that proper debate. Let's get the best governance structure that we can get, and let's get the money drawn down. One of the things that I'm doing, which Andrew and other leaders know, is trying to make sure that it becomes more transparent. So at the moment, for example, Chair, you'll know this, we've got one scrutiny committee. We've got more than one. So if you have a number of scrutiny committees, it will increase that scrutiny. But we have to make sure that, we have to work within the regulations and that they are there.
I think the question was about how elected members can be involved. I think that was it. And through scrutiny. Councillor Marchington.
Yeah, thank you, Shabir, for highlighting your priorities. I mean, I don't want to come in on some of the other... Just looking at the children's services stuff, I think all of us appreciate the journey that children's services have come through, and I think all of us would want to support us on a future journey to outstanding. So we appreciate, I personally, in terms of scrutiny, appreciate the work that Viv in particular has done in leading that. That's great. One of the concerns that's coming up through panel is factors that are out with the council's control. So we can do what we can do in terms of our looked after children, in terms of improving educational outcomes, in terms of facilities for children. But there seems to be one or two barriers which are, not in our direct control. So have you got any, have you had any experience about dealing with external agencies, or have you got any plans to deal with any external agencies to make sure we get the best outcomes possible for all, as far as we can do, for all our young people?
I think one of the things that Ofsted highlighted was that relationship with our partners, our schools, and it is a difficult dilemma, because although we have got no direct control over schools, I think where we were then and where we are now is a lot more positive, and the reason why I know that is because you just go to the head teachers, and when you're talking to them, their story is very, very different. And I think in terms of getting the best outcome for the child, you need to actually look at the whole thing holistically and try and get all the partners to work together. That's why we actually invest in the money that I highlighted in the budget, in terms of getting some specialist social workers, getting a formalised training, getting sort of like more better communications, investing in health as well, not just in education, investing and working with the police. So there's a long way to go, but that is something that we need to aspire to actually get an outstanding children's services.
Yeah, I think that's great, picking up on the partnership and using our resources, particularly with health and police. Have you had any contact with the Regional Schools Commissioner, or any plans to have contact with the Regional Schools Commissioner particularly about educational outcomes?
I personally haven't. I did when I had a previous portfolio for schools, but as leader I haven't. But one thing what we were doing is we had an improvement board, and on there Ofsted was regularly one of the members that was part of that improvement board. My colleague Viv Kendrick, who you mentioned, she's had a number of meetings with the Regional Commissioner in terms of how we can actually continue to actually work more effectively and make a big difference to all our children. So yes, Viv is actually on top of making sure that we have a very good relationship with the Schools Commissioner.
Thanks for your presentation. That's really helpful. I mean, on devolution, I think you're right. West Yorkshire is one of the areas that has been left out really at the moment. If we look at Greater Manchester and some of the funding it has got, I guess one of the important things with the devolution package is going to be the funding that comes with it and the areas that will be devolved. So just be interested to hear a little bit about skills and how that will be devolved, or what the leaders are fighting for on skills, given some of the issues we have locally. And I guess also under a mayoral model, the leaders play a part in any decisions that are made. The mayor doesn't really make a decision normally by themselves, so the leaders will have a say in that. Just on inclusive growth, just wanted to ask how things are going with community wealth building. I know we were looking at anchor institutions and how we put those in place. So just wondering if any anchors are in place at the moment. And then just on the town and villages, which I think's really good. I think you said 7 to 8 million that we're putting aside for that this year. So just any information that we're able to give around the criteria of how we're prioritising. So are we looking at things like deprivation, or how healthy we think a centre is? How will we decide which ones come first?
I'm trying to remember that because I thought Andrew's questions were bad, but Anyway, right, devolution, in terms of what the deal is going to be about. Well, deals, it's not just about skills, all those skills is a big part of it. I'll come on to that in a minute. It's also about the transport infrastructure and how transport works in our local West Yorkshire area. It's also about the infrastructure and the connectivity, not just from city to city, but interconnectivity between towns, like from here to Meltham or Murfield or here from Batley, so it's not just about Leeds and Manchester and Huddersfield and all that. It's also about innovation, and the massive ask from government on innovation. It's also about productivity, because that's another target that the government is looking at, and quite rightly it's the right target to have. and skills, at the moment, there's a bit of a debate going on nationally. We will get the adult education budget to some degree, but in terms of skills, it's such a massive agenda at the moment, right? Yeah, the FE and HE colleges play a major part in that, and that's a big dilemma for us, because if you ask businesses in terms of what skills they want to actually become more productive and sustain in the future, what we know and what we would like to do based on our intelligence and what the other organisations do, there's a mismatch. So skills is a massive agenda, but I don't see that being something that we will be able to crack in this round of devolution deals. That'll be an ongoing dialogue with government. There's also a lot of stuff that we actually just talked about, which will not be able to bottom out in this deal, because there's also a CSR that's going to be carried out, comprehensive spending review, from government, but as long as the deal and the narrative and the commitment is there with the range of partners and Whitehall, it will unlock a lot of potential for future. In terms of governance, and you mentioned that the mayor will have a governance structure. It's going to be more or less in terms of how we're operating at the moment, but I can't say too many things because there's still a lot more work to do. But one of the things we are all arguing for is it needs to be more democratic in terms of accountability, and one of the things that actually we're quite fortunate as Kirklees is that we actually work quite well on a cross-party basis, and I'm not just saying that because I'm the leader. A lot of the other local authorities, when I say that, well, this is how I want to see the governance roll out, it's quite challenging for them, and the reason why that is because they've got big majorities, but sometimes having big majorities is not healthy. I think if you've got a bit more of a balance, and from the point of view of accountability and public scrutiny, you could argue that you get a better decision. That's why Andrew's point in terms of that wider governance, in terms of having a regional assembly type of thing, right? Yeah, a lot of members will agree with that, but we're not going to get that. It doesn't matter how much we argue, it's just not going to come. And in terms of inclusive growth, you mentioned, basically in terms of anchor organisations, we've got the NHS, we've got the schools, we've got the police, we've got the fire authority, and we've got the universities. There's a lot of work that's taking place. And one example I'll give you, Chair, without spending too much time, is when you go to some organisations like the NHS, they think that they actually, because they're the NHS, they feel that they actually really good at inclusive growth, but they don't realise that actually if you look at how much of the pound they spend stays within Kirklees, like we're pretty good, and our projections are even better in terms of moving forward. So it's sometimes, right, it's getting them nuts and bolts and them basics right, that takes some time. It's about hearts and minds, to win them over. Okay.
Yeah, I've got two questions for you. First of all, in terms of the mayor, if Kirklees decides to go down that route, how is that going to impact on some of the other monies that comes into Kirklees? For example, with the mayor, there will be like certain criteria that will be attached to that. But in terms of some of the other resources that we may be getting, that as a council we're able to apply for, how will that impact on that role once it's there? And my other question is, in terms of the coronavirus that everybody's talking about, what sort of information has been put out to employees and particularly some of the partner agencies, and what's our policy around, for example, if a member of staff goes off sick, and is that part of in their sick leave? Is it going to be counted towards their sick leave? And how's that going to be monitored?
Thanks, Chair. Firstly, in terms of devolution, this is about levelling up. One of the things that the government was very, very clear about was this was not about letting go of powers. So it's not devolving anything away from what we do. It's about getting powers from government, and it's about levelling up in terms of what the other mayoral deals have delivered. So from a Kirklees point of view, right, we will not be giving up anything. We'll actually be gaining a lot more in terms of the stuff we can do. In terms of coronavirus, I would not believe everything. I would not believe everything what you read in the papers, because the story about individual employees and all the rest of it, right? You know, the article's quite balanced. You know, it gave one viewpoint, and our director of public health has then gave the reality. I don't want to comment on individual cases because I think there's one in the papers at the moment. But you just need to read the article. If that's what you're referring to, then the facts will be made very, very clear. One of the things that I would like to say about coronavirus is it is a big issue, but Public Health England are the agency that is responsible for actually working up the details and the plans on that.
I think the question was about the employees of Kirklees, employees and partners. What messages are being sent out?
Yeah, well, public health, yeah. But the reason why I mentioned that is because the article in the papers in the Examiner, and that's why I'm very careful in terms of how I'm answering that. But every single member of staff has actually been given very, very clear guidelines, right? You know, in terms of how we can actually deal with individual cases, and that's what I'm saying. I wouldn't just read too much into the stuff that is out there in the media.
Yeah, in terms of the NHS England advice to people generally is that you stay inside. So if for example, employees stay off work for say maybe 2 weeks, they're going to hit the trigger, aren't they, in terms of the way their sickness is monitored, and how we're going to be dealing with that. You know, are we actually taking that into consideration?
It's good to know that my chair of scrutiny, who was part of that health and wellbeing board, right, yeah, has got a lot more knowledge than I have, and I won't pretend that I can compete with that. But you seem to have a lot more perfect, and I would expect that from you. I will take that on board, but it's good that you're on top of your brief.
Can we ask about the master? Can we ask about the master planning? So you've got your Dewsbury master plan, your Huddersfield master plan, and when you came in September, you said you were developing over the next few months your master plan for Batley. You were developing over the next few months your master plan for Batley. That was said in September 2019. So I'm wondering where you are with the Batley plan and how the Dewsbury master plan, what you're doing in relation to that, in respect of the issues that Pioneer House have currently been having.
Yeah, like I said in my budget statement, Chair, is we're going to be investing in all our towns and villages, and the Batley Action Plan is already in the process of actually getting developed. So as soon as we get the details, I will be the first one to jump up and down about it. Not least because I'm a Batley councillor. In terms of sorry, what was the second part of your question? Pioneer House, yeah. Pioneer House members will know that the contract has gone into liquidation. Not to panic, because we've been assured that business will continue as usual. The college has actually taken on the workers. This came out last week. What the chief executive did was write to all the Dewsbury members to actually make them aware that, you know, this has happened right here, but it's not catastrophic. You know, they're managing that situation, and that is still the case. So our plan to deliver on the Pioneer House will continue.
Can I just, there's a couple of things that you mentioned last time that you haven't perhaps touched on. One was community safety, gangs and knife attacks, working in partnership with other organisations. And another was Greener Kirklees, litter and fly tipping. And I just wondered where you are with leading from the Cabinet on the greener Kirklees and the community safety, because littering and fly tipping is getting on the increase, isn't it? I mean, I don't know why it is acceptable to throw things out of car windows and things like that. I just don't know why people do that. But there are other councils that are leading on having signage and things like that in places where there is a lot of the littering and fly tipping happening, and putting in a lot of fines, etc. So where are you, from a Cabinet perspective, where are you on that?
I'm glad you've asked that question, because gangs and knife crime, that was featured in our budget. We put money back in there because one of the things that we've realised is we need to actually target our resources more effectively. So on top of the work that's already been done by Carol and her portfolio area, we have actually prioritised this area, and money has gone in, and you'll start to see more work that's been done, not just in terms of gangs and youth related issues, antisocial behaviour, but we also put in £600,000 to our youth services for the outreach work. Over the last 10 years, the youth service has actually had major cutbacks, to the point that, is it still a youth service? I would argue it wasn't, so we need to put that money back in. In terms of green and Kirklees and drop spots you mentioned, again, that was the highlight of the budget, because we put money in to the budget to actually address growth spots and making the environment more greener, and that money will be actually devolved at local level. And one of the things I mentioned was there's also another £300,000 that's gone in to support ward councillors, because ward councillors are the heartbeat of the organisation, I feel, and we will be taking tactics from them in terms of where we start to actually address the local issues that you've mentioned.
I noticed in Bradford they use their illuminated signs and things. Bradford use their illuminated signs that they have to say, it's £100 fine for anybody and things like this. And I just wondered what sort of campaign you had as a Cabinet going forward to support that money.
I will take that on board, Chair, in terms of having illuminated signs. I think it's a good idea.
Now, Councillor Bolt, I think you had a question, but I don't really want to rehearse the flood and climate emergency until I get to those items. So, Councillor Bolt, is it outside of those parameters? Okay, then.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I was looking at items 8 and 9, and although the leader had given an expansive praise, we'll keep those for those. He mentioned, going to one of his latter points that he mentioned Pioneer House. Through you, Chair, I think the clue for Pioneer House is that the project is being delivered on behalf of Kirklees College in partnership with Kirklees Council. So wouldn't it be more appropriate, and bearing in mind, as the leader has just said, that members are the heartbeat of this authority, for all members to be involved and told about the situation, not just Dewsbury members. It does affect, many of us have staff who work there in our constituencies. We have young people who go there to Kirklees College, Dewsbury campus. So it's not just a parochial Dewsbury issue. So can we have, I believe we have a bigger communications empire than we used to have. A couple of other points. The leader made a comment that he thought that the council was seen by many as the fourth emergency service. It was actually the AA who used that in their advertising slogan. But I wonder if the council are now the fourth emergency service, where the leader puts the air ambulance, Coast Guard and mountain rescue services in the ranking. And he mentioned housing, which doesn't appear later on the agenda. And it's probably something I think Mr Franklin may be able to help with. Court cases have clarified that the council's planning committees are not quasi-judicial, I understand. And I read a paper by Richard Harwood of 39 Essex Street Chambers called Probity and Decision Making. Could we have clarity on that? Is a planning committee a quasi-judicial body? Or is it, as eminent barristers and judges have said, it's an administrative function? Thank you.
So, communication, planning, you've got them, all right. And if you need to come back with it.
Anyway, yeah. No, I think Martin's got a valid point. I'll make sure that communication goes out to all councillors I accept that. Firstly, my apologies if I misled you or anybody else. When I meant the fourth emergency service, I meant all statutory organisations. And I think I did say the police and the fire and council and mountain rescue. So all the, and the fifth emergency service, I mentioned the voluntary and community sector. So my apologies if there was a misunderstanding there. But the fourth emergency service is all the others that are the blue light services. And I think I thought, yeah, sorry. So what I'm trying to say is you've got a point. It's not just the council, it's all the other statutory services that aren't blue light services. And as police and fire are blue light services, and ambulance are blue light services, but it's all the other services. The last bit about the legality in terms of judicial review and the quasi-judiciary, I will need to ask Julie to respond to you because I'm not an expert, you know. Well, I think
if you want to come back, to scrutiny on that one.
Well, no, okay. I think I don't want to come back to scrutiny. I think we need unless Matthias can answer that. Can you? If you can't, we'll get Julie to. But anyway, go on, Matthias.
Yeah. I think if you want to come back to scrutiny with an answer at some point in the future, okay? Because I think what you need to understand is that this is scrutiny and not planning, and planning are quasi-judicial committees, and therefore it needs the answer needs consideration.
Sorry, Chair. Planning and not.
And when scrutiny has the answer,
that is
then
not.
We will.
Well, let's hope the Chief Legal Officer can reply quicker for you than.
Yeah. Okay. So. Please provide scrutiny with the reply. Okay. Right then. Any more on the leader's priorities? Okay, thank you, Councillor Pandor. And we'll move now swiftly on to climate emergency, working party, and there's air quality as well in this. So, who's going to start to introduce, because you've got a PowerPoint demo, and when you are speaking, can you introduce who you are first so that people know? Thank you.
Chair. So I'm Nahid Maida, Cabinet Member for Greener Kirklees. Delighted to be at Scrutiny. I just wanted to say that the number of staff we have here is a clear demonstration of how seriously the work of the cross-party on climate change has been taken. Not only that, Kirklees has put its money where its mouth is by allocating a budget which is additional to what goes on across the council services. So there was a round-robin review of how much councils are spending on climate change, and I'd like to say in year 2020-21, ours is the largest budget. I am also very happy to say that since 2019, as the leader mentioned, the cross-party working group concluded in November, we are seriously following all of the recommendations of that working party, and just to give you an idea of some of the things that we've been doing. So in terms of the recommendations, we put them into phase 1, phase 2, and under phase 1, the budget that's been allocated to climate change, we have acquired 60 acres of land to plant trees. We will have, by the end of this financial year, 80 electric vehicle charging points. As and when our fleets are coming up for renewal, we are changing to electric vehicles. And as Councillor Cooper said, some hybrid. We put away 70,000, we are going to plant 70,000 trees acknowledging that it was the young people who brought the issue to our agenda, and we wanted to acknowledge every young person in the district. So 2 locations have been found, one in the north and one in the south. There's been money put into the budget to review school travel and transport plans, 2 million, and the staff will be here talking about some of the initiatives we will be taking under that. The leader mentioned place-based working, again 2 million, around issues to do with climate change. Whilst we're waiting and working on the waste management waste management strategy, we have put away 2 million in recycling. So the major significant investment in the next few years or next 5 years is going to be in waste. We are also putting away, there has been money put away in our heating network system, where we're hoping that all of the businesses within the ring road are included in this new heat network system, and we are hoping that that should be running 2023, and I'm looking at John. He will provide the details. And that is going to be future-proofed in relation to that, in relation to poverty proofing, because somehow, not somehow, we know, for example, majority of the time when we're talking about climate change, it always feels like a middle-class dialogue. And we need to make sure that our most vulnerable residents aren't left behind, that everybody is part of this conversation, and all they actually benefit from any of the enhanced services. We looked at 5 services, and one of those has been mentioned, building and refurbishments, and we've been going up and down the country looking at energy efficiency, both in terms of building materials, and energy efficiency in terms of running your homes. So I think the last one we went to was Nottingham Energy Sprung, and the leader mentioned the demonstrator scheme in terms of passive housing. One of the recommendations in the report of the climate emergency was Youth Summit, which is scheduled and coming along and will take place in autumn. And there is a budget set aside for the asks by our young people about the projects that they want to work on. Kirklees Climate Commission has been mentioned and was one of the recommendations. We're very busy working on that in relation to the shadow board, and we're almost ready to set out the dates of when it would start. In all of this, we are trying to future-proof. So when we're talking about hybrid electric cars, renewing our fleet, we want to make sure that we don't put our money, all our money in one basket, that we make sure that we're looking to the future and that we are future-proofed in everything we do, from building to our fleets, to our waste management contract, to the climate emergency that we are experiencing in terms of flooding. And I want to leave it here and pass it on to John to take us through a presentation. Thank you.
Yeah, can I just out clarity just before you start, John? Just a clarity on one point. You said we've got the largest budget. Can you just clarify largest budget in relation to what, please? Just for clarity's purposes.
So when I'm talking about a budget, there was a review done around the country to see how much councils were spending on climate emergency or climate change. And in this current year, our budget, which is additional to what goes on across the council, is one of the largest. So I have it here So it is one of the largest. I have it here and I can pass it on.
Okay. It's just that you said it was the largest, so I was wanting to know what in comparison with what. That was all for clarity. I was wanting to know for clarity in comparison with what. Okay. Is this on this point?
Just quickly, could we see that information?
Yes, you can.
Thank you.
Yeah, I've made a note on that. Yeah, I could do some clarification about exactly what that means.
WhatsApp it across.
So we would like some clarity on that, please. Okay, and some information. All right, John, do you want to do the presentation?
Hello everyone, I'm John Atkinson from the Major Projects Service. So I'm here this afternoon to provide you with an update on the Climate Change and Air Quality Programme. What I've done is set this out in a presentation which effectively summarises the content of the report that you've already should have seen. You'll find that it structures in a similar way to the report does as well. So just to quickly recap about kind of how we come to be here. Obviously we had the Climate Emergency Declaration in January 2019, and then the Climate Emergency Working Party, which was set up to identify priority proposals, which ran from March to September last year. And then the Council's initial response was set out in reports to Cabinet and Council in November 2019. There was then a follow-up Cabinet report in January this year, which set out the proposals for electric vehicles and electric vehicle infrastructure, and of course the commitments made in the budget in February this year. So just to summarise what we'd like to cover this afternoon, we'll provide some detail on the progress of the Phase 1 programme. If you recall, we basically split what is in the initial programme between priority actions that we are taking now and a more comprehensive Phase 2, which is in the process of being worked up for consideration by the Council. And I'll also cover as well how this fits into the established regional working structures, in particular the West Yorkshire Combined Authority. When it comes to the Phase 1 projects as well, I brought a row of friends with me sitting along the back there. I'll hand over to them for the key points to provide a detail on the individual projects. And finally, we make a recommendation for an annual report to the Council's scrutiny function, which will be aligned with our disclosure of our district carbon emissions to the CDP by the 31st of July each year. So without further ado, the Phase 1 priorities. So I'll go through these as they're numbered. The first one is in relation to our net zero target. If you recall, we sought expert advice from the Tyndall Centre for Climate Change Research, which resulted in a science-based carbon reduction target of achieving net zero emissions by 2041, and we then upped that a bit to 2038 in order to comply and align with our colleagues in the Leeds City region. That in turn is designed to align with the national net zero target, which has been legislated for and recognises that we are as a region a comparatively high carbon area. So that was agreed on the 12th of November last year. The next point is that we will be disclosing our carbon and our council and district carbon emissions by an external body, which is the CDP, formerly known as the Carbon Disclosure Project. That exists as a not-for-profit organisation based in London that has a worldwide coverage. It exists for organisations, businesses and increasingly municipalities and cities to publicly declare their district carbon emissions as a means of benchmarking against others and also to share best practice as well. And for ourselves as well, it is a statement of intent as well. Effectively, there's nowhere to hide. So the key dates for that are that there is a window that opens between April and July each year where we will prepare the report that will then get signed off and submitted by the deadline of the 31st of July 2020. And then finally, we also have an internal council carbon emissions reporting process, which actually predates the climate emergency declaration. And this goes back to our 40% reduction by 2020 for council emissions. That was set against a 2005-6 baseline, and the target itself was set in 2010. So again, this year's reporting is being finalised now and will be completed and signed off by the end of March this year, and it will be made publicly available. So, moving on to the other Phase 1 priorities, I will now hand over to my colleague Rob, who will speak a little bit about the woodland and green infrastructure proposals via the White Rose Forest.
Thank you for that. Right, my name's Rob Dolby. I'm the Green Space Ops Manager for the Council. Right, we've effectively aligned with the White Rose Forest. So the White Rose Forest forms part of the Northern Forest Network, which is a very large piece of work that stretches right away from Liverpool to Hull. Our part includes a bit of North Yorkshire, most of West Yorkshire, and then slightly south of us as well. So for the Kirklees part of that, we are looking at around about an increase of 4.5% on our canopy cover. So it takes us to 30% in total, or a 30% increase, which takes us to about 20%. That equates to around 2.5 million trees to plant, which equates to about 2,500 hectares in total in land. The council at present is undertaking a review of all the land it has, with the expectation that we're in line broadly with our other partner authorities. We probably have about 10% of the ask. So we probably have around about 250 hectares that we can offer up, that we own. That will be an interesting piece of work, as it involves land that's presently under grazing licences and so on, bits of land that are presently used for other forms of green space. But the council will be making decisions. There is a triage process. It then goes to asset board, and that then is decided about that land use. With the anticipation that, again, falling in line with the White Rose Forest, we should have finished that piece of work by July, and we report back to the White Rose Forest Board, which is chaired by Leeds. And then we get on with the work, with the expectation we will finish our bit around about 4 or 5 years' time. So we should have planted up in around 4 or 5 years' time, which is a huge piece of work in itself. While that is going on, we'll be doing third-party land identification, so doing a piece of work on a landscape level to understand which pieces of ground develop the most benefit that we could look at. So it's looking at things like natural flood management, it's looking at landscape linkage, it's looking at biodiversity gain, looking at all of those kind of factors, which will then start to give us some targeted landowners to have some targeted communications with. We'll also put out a broader offer, basically trying to understand how can we support landowners in change. And that may well be impacted by, which is why, whichever the point is down here, where it says it's at risk, the central government policy on the Common Agricultural Policy and what they provide subsidies to landowners for. If that changes and goes to benefit as opposed to agricultural food production, then there's a greater opportunity then for landowners, especially on marginal land, to consider repurposing their land. So there is a big discussion to be had around that, with the intention that we would want to finish planting around about 2031. That's a fairly broad date, but 2031, 2035, somewhere along that region, because it's around canopy cover. The White Rose Forest offer is around closed canopy, so you need to have relatively high planting densities, and you need some time for that to establish. So whilst it's the White Rose Forest offer does say 25 years, that isn't 25 years to finish planting, it's 25 years to achieve that level of canopy cover. So that's where we are with that. It's not just around canopy, it's around carbon sequestration. So there are metrics inside the White Rose Forest to look at carbon sequestration, and that's also supported by the Forestry Commission. They've produced a piece of work around, I can get very boring around this, but I'll try not to, around yield classes and growth types. So it's a mixture of broadleaf and panaceous type materials. So looking at all of those type of things, which are the best for the actual land types we've got, and which are the best for carbon sequestration, and also for habitat management as well. So that's where we are with that.
Thanks, Rob. The next one is the Kirklees Climate Commission. We committed to set up a climate commission with an associated green charter, which was one of the key proposals from the Climate Emergency Working Party. And some of those here will remember a memorable presentation from Andy Goulson at Leeds University, who presented their sort of methodology for how to do a climate commission, which we've taken forward, and I think all parties concerned are in agreement that the Leeds University methodology is the right one. We are working with partners and have sought advice from partners around how we set that up. We're currently looking for having an initial session of the Commission as soon as possible after the May local elections, and that this will be in its first instance, will be a shadow board, which the reason behind which is to instigate the Climate Commission, but then allow the independent entity to agree its own terms of reference and develop a green charter. And I'd stress at this point that it is a body that will become an independent body from the council, but which we anticipate the council will play a leading role within. So we have sought advice from Andy Goulson at Leeds University, and we've met with him along with the Kirklees Climate Emergency Group as well. I think we all agreed that that's the best way to do it. The shadow board, that side of it was decided so we can effectively get the ball rolling as soon as possible, but without the council being subject to sort of allegations of picking and choosing who sits on that as well. The next one is around the aim to develop a Kirklees Youth Summit and a campaign for engaging with young people around the climate emergency. So again, a working group was established in January this year to take this forward, engaging and working with existing youth organisations. Looking towards the end of the academic year, possibly the summer/autumn, to hold the actual events. But we'd also hope that this isn't just going to be a one-off event, and we'll also be working to make sure there is an ongoing legacy to learn from it and possibly repeat in future. This will be led by Children's Services at the Council, but we do recognise that the wider group and Council will need to support in terms of providing the content and some of the specialist climate emergency related discussion outcomes, etc. The next one relates to the West Yorkshire Combined Authority pledge for the Leeds City region to reach net zero carbon emissions by 2038. This links to the first point around the Council's own 2038 target. We signed the pledge in July 2019, and work is ongoing with Combined Authority colleagues and partners at other local authorities around developing ideas that we can work on together and achieve efficiencies that way. And I'll talk a little bit more about that towards the end of the presentation. The next point is the action around implementing an extensive communications and engagement campaign, and I will hand over to my colleague Alex for that section. Thanks.
So firstly, it's a massive piece of work that's going to be over the course of some years in terms of a communications plan, and it's going to continue to develop and evolve as the council's agenda on this issue does. So our immediate focus really started dating back to November has been to ensure that residents and partners and local businesses and organisations are up to date with all of our key announcements and the work that the council's been doing, i.e. getting plans through Cabinet, full council, investments, etc. So we've kept on top of getting those key announcements out there into the public and to ensure that people are up to date with what we're trying to do as an initial starting point. And that's included work we've recently done with the Examiner, who've done a few pieces on highlighting what we've done. That was in January, and we've had coverage in the MJ recently, which focused on our 3 budget priorities, with 2 of those pages being solely, which Councillor Mathers just showed me now. 2 of those pages were focusing entirely on our work to have an impact on the climate emergency. Up to this point, we've done what we can in ensuring that people know what we're doing as an authority, but the next piece of work spanning from that will be the much more extensive communications and engagement campaign, which can't come before key things such as the Youth Summit and the Climate Commission and the Green Charter are established, because we need those to give us our objectives in order for it to be something that we can measure over a period of time. We need those key events as a starting point. Another update I would give is just on the internal communications element, which those that were in the working party will be aware that a big element of that was a focus on ensuring that our own house is in order. And we've started the early steps of implementing something that we're calling climate champions, where people from across different teams and services volunteer themselves to be a climate champion within that service to drive change from within their own team. That's for now. That's the update in terms of communications.
Thanks, Alex. And then it's moving on. This next sheet covers those items that are dictated or influenced by the recent February Council budget priorities. So the first one I'll hand over to Martin to talk through the Air Quality Action Plan, and then the investment in public electric vehicle charging infrastructure.
My name is Martin Wood. I'm a Public Protection Operational Manager, and air quality falls within my remit. So the first point on there is the Air Quality Action Plan, which was subject to a detailed hearing by the Economies and Neighbourhoods panel earlier this year. If we remember back to the Cabinet announcements back in November, we agreed our Air Quality Action Plan, which was a substantial document containing nearly or just over 100 individual actions to deal with air quality across the district and within our 10 individual air quality management areas. That has been submitted to the government. It's a statutory document back in November for approval. I'm pleased to say we received the outcome of that almost a month ago now on the 13th of February, and that's been accepted by national government as an acceptable action plan, and that allows us now to move forward into delivery. So while all that's been going on, we've been recruiting some additional support within the air quality team. So 2 project officers are coming in to help us deliver that. One started a few weeks ago and one in fact started today. So other than just going through a bit of induction with those new members of staff, we're now starting to look at working up detailed project plans and the individual bits and pieces, engaged with stakeholders on some of those actions. But we need to remember that it's a 5-year action plan and not all these things will start to happen immediately. We were lucky or successful during this year's budget round to have some capital funding allocated to the action plan, specifically around a couple of key interventions in some of our air quality management areas and across some of the transport infrastructure proposals around traffic management. So those that money now needs to be sort of worked up into a detailed plan, which will be ongoing. Electric vehicles also, or the electric vehicle infrastructure, so charging points falls under my remit. And we've, as been announced by Councillor Mayor, that there's £1 million in this year's budget to enhance the work that we've already been doing. The work we've already been doing is working with the Combined Authority on a £500,000 scheme to install 17 rapid charge points in Kirklees. That work has been ongoing over the past year to 18 months. I'm pleased to say that we've got 2 charge points now live in Kirklees. We've got another 7 that are in the ground waiting for powering up, and we're currently working through the details to get a further 10 in the ground, if my maths is correct. But then we need to be moving beyond that initial project to look at how we can boost electric vehicle charging within Kirklees. Really welcome the budget allocation of additional £1 million to do that, but that's actually quite a lot of hard work. It might seem like it's an easy job to install an electric vehicle charge point in the ground, but there's a lot of work that needs to go on behind the scenes, procuring a supplier, identifying appropriate sites, whether that's within our communities, in the outlying parts of the district, or within our central towns and large villages. So what we'll be doing initially is doing some procurement work and working with stakeholders to get a supplier on the ground to make sure that we've got a decent fit for the future supplier. Then also working with our colleagues across West Yorkshire and the Combined Authority to undertake an evidence-based study into the most appropriate types and locations for charge points, because it's the easiest thing to say, oh, we'll put them here or we'll put them there. But are they the right types of chargers for the right locations, for the right people? Because this is a fantastic new area to work in. It's something that hasn't been around before, so we need to just take time to get it right, and hopefully by having an evidence-based plan about the types and locations where these electric vehicle charge points can go, we will avoid making mistakes as best we can, bearing in mind this is something brand new for everybody to work within. So we've just got to bear with us, and we'll try as best to get a comprehensive network of infrastructure. But it will take time, and my anticipation is that although we've got the budget allocated now, the majority of this municipal year, or the one that will be starting in April 2020, will be around getting all the evidence together, locating the appropriate sites and the type of charger that we want to install, plus getting a supplier on the ground. So we won't be seeing any infrastructure until the very end of this municipal year, because we don't want to rush into this like bulls in China shops. But we've already started some great work. We've had an opportunity to learn from that, and now we're moving into the next steps. But it won't be the final outcome. This is just one step along the journey in levelling up, as Councillor Pandor said, our EV infrastructure.
Thanks, Martin. So I'll hand over to Will now just to talk quickly through the electric vehicles item. I think what we'll try and do is quickly go through these last remaining projects in a fairly concise way, if that's all right. Thank you.
Thank you. It's Will O'Connor, Head of Operational Services. So I'll be very brief on this. We've made a great start to electrifying our fleet. So we've moved from having 2 electric vehicles in the whole of the fleet in 2018 to today having 50 hybrids, 5 fully electric vans and 20 fully electric cars, which, like I said, is a great start. But now we're moving into the next phase of trying to make them more established within the fleet. So the idea this year is to try and procure about 50 vans. Some of the issues we've had to overcome in electrifying our fleet is the network capacity. So a good example was our depot in Flint Street, where we had to time the moving of our CCTV out into Civic in order to free up the network capacity to actually install 20 electric pull cars into that depot. So that is the big stumbling block for the first phase. The second phase, you'll notice that it says infrastructure and vans. So we have included the cost of installing the infrastructure for this phase, so we're hoping that this will accelerate it a bit more. We're also working with our partners such as K&H, as we're targeting that small to medium van, which is the most viable at the moment, because as you move through the size of vehicles into such things as refuse collection vehicles or cage vehicles that need a higher payload, we're seeing that the technology is not quite there yet. We're hoping that hybrid, hydrogen and electric may see it in a few generations, but we're not quite there at the moment. Hence why we've looked to lease some of the best technologies we have at the moment to sort of get ourselves ready to come into the market at the right time when the technology is mature. Thank you.
Thanks, Will. The next one related to the relaunching and expanding the council's free parking offer for low-emission vehicles. So this is this scheme will effectively expand and remove some of the restrictions around the current free parking scheme for electric vehicles, allowing members of the public to park across Kirklees without restriction at council car parks. The scheme is currently in development, and we expect it to launch later on in April this year. So I'll pass on now to Martin again, just to cover the electric vehicle policy.
So one of the announcements as part of the climate emergency and air quality reports back in November was to develop a comprehensive electric vehicle policy for the borough. That work has been ongoing since before November and has been sort of developing and rolling through in the background as we've been working up proposals around more electric vehicles in our fleet and our infrastructure plans. But that policy, really needs a lot of internal and external stakeholder engagement before we're in a position to release it to the public. Because as I may have alluded to before, it's not just as easy as buying a new electric vehicle or putting an electric charge point in the ground. There's a lot of asset needs, legal issues, a lot of internal departments to sort of work within and get on board to make sure that everyone knows what they need to do and has an input into the policy. So all that sort of work is ongoing at the moment. We're starting to clear some of those hurdles and I'm anticipating that we'll have a policy that the Cabinet can endorse during the summer this year.
Thanks, Martin. Wendy, you okay to talk a bit about sustainable schools?
Wendy Blakely, Head of Public Protection. Good afternoon. I'll keep it short. So my section is about the sustainable travel policy for schools. One of the hardest things you have to do within the council is change behaviours. It's been difficult working up through sustainable travel to do that. I think we're at the right time now in relation to climate emergency, and we are building up support and help to help our young people who are at school to travel to school in the most sustainable way available to them. It's not going to be the same solution for everybody. Everybody's journey is different, every school's different. So we are actually working with colleagues and doing it on a place-based programme, and we've got a really good example of where public health and other colleagues have been working with the school, looking at the solution. The school, the community have worked together to come up with a solution, and one of those is to have a permissive path through a field. We've got volunteers doing a walk to school bus, train, is it, crocodile, with the children, and we've also at the same time there is a breakfast club as well, so it's an all-round solution. There's several of those examples happening, and we'll be developing that as we work through this programme. We are building up the school travel team again, so we're putting more resources in there and working with colleagues in education, air quality, and the communities and the schools themselves.
Okay, yeah, thank you. The next one is just the Huddersfield Heat Network. So that, very quickly, we are procuring consultants in June this year with a resulting outline business case due in June 2021. At that point, the council will be able to make a decision whether or not to proceed with the delivery of the network.
Do you want to ask questions on phase one to start with? I think, are we ready for questions? Yeah, or do you want to look at the phase two priorities first? Yeah, so I think if we ask some questions...
Is just one slide?
Is there just one slide? Yeah, so if you do that quickly then,
yeah,
because we've got a lot of questions, I can feel that we've got a lot of...
Yeah, absolutely. So phase two, if you recall, is effectively a more comprehensive plan, recognising the scale of the challenge and the severity of the climate emergency that we face. We're anticipating that this will be a comprehensive programme that will take place through to 2038 effectively, and how we deliver on our carbon budget and our target. Very quickly, it will include detailed consideration of the proposals that resulted from the Climate Emergency Working Party. We're going through them one by one and identifying any element of corporate risk associated with them and trying to prioritise them in terms of carbon savings. And also we'll be looking at directly linking projects to a not only a cost assessment but also a carbon assessment as well, so we'll be able to say that this intervention will save X amount of carbon over a certain amount of years and relate that back to our carbon budget. So it's obviously quite critical to the programme going forward. So that's in preparation, and we are preparing that plan for Cabinet and portfolio holders to consider in June this year, to be followed up by an update for Council in July.
Thank you very much. I just want to make sure we've time for questions, but also we have another important item on flooding that we will have lots of questions on as well, and I don't want that to get lost as well. Okay, so Councillor Marchington.
Thank you, everybody, for all your presentations. That's brilliant. Apologies if I don't ask everybody a question. And if you don't, there's not time to get back to me now, that's fine. Just a quick one for Rob to start off with. It's based on the back of the White Rose Forest thing. Do we still have a link with Morse for the future? Because there was some discussions in the past. You might not want to answer that now, but if we have, I'd like to know what we're doing there, because there's, again, in terms of carbon capture and stuff like that, that would be really positive. Do you want to list them, or shall I just... Martin, again, thanks for that about the air quality stuff, really good news. One of the things, we've got the 10 air quality action zones. Is some of the learning around that applicable to perhaps other areas in the borough? I mean, thinking about outside schools. Will, you're talking about the charging at Flint Street. One of the things that thought, the proximity of Flint Street to the waste to energy plant, and I know it's not waste, but is there a possibility of linking electricity produced at the incinerator? That shortage. If we can link that for around charging, you got benefits of not actually having to transmit that electricity as far, and as well as actually finally getting use of the heat out of the plant, so it does become a waste to energy plant as opposed to just electricity. And Wendy, I don't know if this is a question for today, but again, about encouraging secondary school children to use public transport to get to schools. We know how the free bus pass for over however old you have to be now actually did massively increase the uptake, because if you've got it, why drive your car when you've got something for free? That seems to be the West Yorkshire mentality. It's the one my father uses, fantastic. So actually, what would the costs be of providing all our secondary school children with a free transport pass, whether they need it or not, on the basis that if you've got a free pass, why travel in the car?
Yes. So yeah, we're working with the National Trust. The Malls of the Future are working with them on the reconstruction work at Wessington and around the valley. So yes.
In terms of lesson learned from each of the individual air quality management areas, yes. Not all AQMAs have exactly the same reasons why the air quality management areas, different pollutants, different topographies, different layouts. But one of the key lessons that we've learned from one of the original air quality management areas down in Bradley is a traffic management solution using sort of advanced technology on the traffic lights to move vehicles through the junction more effectively. And one of the costed budget proposals that we've got in the £400,000 towards this year's action plan is expanding that trial to the technology that they use down in Bradley and adding some technology on and trying to roll that out in other air quality management areas across the borough. So that work will develop in detail, but it is an example of where we've learned lessons from one of our previous air quality management areas and trying to roll that out in others. Whether it be as successful or even more successful, we don't know until we try it, but that's a good example.
I'll try and be succinct as well. So Flint Street's the wrong side of the railway, but Vine Street isn't. So our waste depot adjoins the site. But what we're doing as part of the heat network is we've been working with Future Highways Research Group and SSE to see can we be a pathfinder where while we're putting the trenching in for the heat network, we also put something called private wiring, which is our own power network coming directly out. And that also links into delivery of 5G, our LED street lighting network, as well as on-street charging. So looking, can we do more, including digital, while we're digging the road up? Let's try and do it once. We're looking at phase one. So once we do the heat network with phase one, once you've got the core established, you can then start to look where you can put add-ons on. So some of the core things will go for the business and our main sort of heat users. Then we can look at, there's some K&H housing estates that come off of it as well that we'd look to try and include, and we'd start to grow it on the back of that once you've got the core spine of it.
Just a quick point as well. The heat network will provide heat and power. It's perhaps a bit of a misnomer, and it's kind of fundamental to its business case, but that will include electricity where possible in the town centre. So it's probably worth thinking about it more in the direction of the town centre in Flint Street. Yeah, the electricity is where you make the money, apparently. Thank you.
And it's set out in legislation who gets the free bus pass, and I think it's possibly something that we would look at across West Yorkshire. Certainly we would be looking at other means first. Children that live closer, we would be encouraging to walk or cycle, or other means. It's an all-round thing. It's not just climate emergency, it's about health as well.
So thanks for the presentations, really interesting, and good to see all the work that's going on. There's a question, I think, about staffing going forward, obviously looking into phase 2, and I think we probably need to ensure that we're geared up for that, because there's going to be lots of opportunities there. Looking at the things which are in phase 1, they're obviously the things that can be done with existing staffing, but if we're going to do more, then we probably need to up that a fair old bit. Just a quick word about ours is the largest budget on climate change. I'll look at the information, we'll see it. It then went down to ours is one of the largest budgets on climate change, which I noticed. I'm really wary of us making statements like that. I think we've got to, I've heard things like we were the first council to pass a climate emergency. We weren't. So I'm just really keen that we're accurate about what we say and don't overstate what we're doing. I think that's important. Moving on, the trees. Now, I'm pleased, obviously, with the amount of tree cover that's going to be there. One of my concerns is there's been so many councils, so many places, and there was a sort of tree war during the general election. Who's going to plant the most trees, which is great. But I worry about supply of trees. If everybody's going to be doing this, have we got the stock? So that's a question. Yep. One of the real weaknesses, I think, one of the emissions, is built environment. So far in the plan, we've got nothing really on existing housing. We've got and my long-standing concerns about us being timorous about passive house when other councils like Norwich and Exeter have done so much. We are doing our pilots and we're being quite timid about it. That is an ongoing concern, and I wonder why we're not learning from other people who've done so much. Is it that we don't really believe in following best practice, but we've got to invent everything ourselves? So that is a real concern. The thing about middle class dialogue, I did listen to what Councillor Mather said, and I think the best way to sort of deal with this is the fuel poverty agenda, and really tackle it and really deal with it. And that's taking us on to the next stage of dealing with retrofit insulation in properties, which we're not doing yet, and we don't seem to have plans to do. So that's a real issue. Phase 1, some good work going on in phase 1. But a lot of it is about comms, a lot of it's signing pledges, there's youth summits, there's commissions. These are all valuable things. And obviously there's the trees and the electric vehicles as well, which I've been long advocating. And so my concern is there's not a lot of carbon saving in phase 1. And so that means that there's got to be a lot more in phase 2. And if we're actually going to achieve our targets. So that's a concern. Let's see. Oh, schools. Wondering if we're doing anything on initiatives with school streets and looking at that, because I think there's some clean air gains to be made there if we promote school streets as a good example. And I think that's about it for the time being.
Thank you. Right, so we're looking to plant somewhere around about 75,000 trees. This next planting season. We've got a commitment from the Woodlands Trust for those, so we've got those lined up. The intention is to form something like a social enterprise or something of that nature, where we'd actually use local endemic tree stock. We would form our own tree nursery, and we grow our own stock effectively to order. So it's a big enterprise. We'd look to grow root train stock, which is has a much higher survival rate, so you can pretty much grow what you need as opposed to growing 50% over with an expectation of large amounts of dieback. We're hoping to go into partnership with a prominent local wildlife charity, which I'm hoping that will be sorted out this week. I'll leave that to your imagination. And yes, that will then key in with a number of very important things. It will a lot around education, around engaging people and engaging school children. They'll go out and collect seed. We will then keep that money local. And if there is any overcapacity, then we can also look to then sell that. And again, the Woodland Trust have said that they will actually certify the nursery if we get it off the ground, and it's obviously certifiable. So we'd look to manage that ourselves rather than worrying about somebody else providing it.
Are you happy to answer?
Thank you, Chair. Just take the question on resources. So it's obviously a cross-service piece of work, as you can tell from the number of people in the room. There have been some positive outcomes of the budget for us in terms of capital and revenue financing. I think, though, that will take some time to filter through into recruitment. Having said that, we've set up some new delegations for this. We've got some governance in place internally to push initiatives forward. We've set up a cross-service climate change project team, which is growing weekly. And we've got a dedicated team within the E&I Directorate to push forward the programme within my service, and John's part of that. And extra staffing capacity is being provided by the corporate strategy team at the moment, which is extremely helpful. But for us, I think phase 2, the scoping of phase 2 will really determine how best to deploy resources around the council. So that's a key part of scoping it out, so we can deploy those resources and get staff increases in our areas. But it is a challenge. We're going from a sounding start really to going fast.
Okay. So, Councillor Cooper, I'm always very proud to be part of Kirklees and what we're doing. And when I say one of the largest budgets, it is. And when I forward it to you, you will see. I did say this financial year, 2021. And in terms of greening the existing environment, you know, a 62 hectares of greening is going to go through on Leeds Road. We are very keen to follow good practice, but also future-proofing. So passive housing may not be the best for us because we've got to look at geography and what 5 or 10 years would look like. So we are definitely making sure we get the best for our buck.
Okay, can I ask a question then about planning? Because planning seems to have been missed completely. Nobody's mentioned planning at all. Whilst we're planting all these trees, we're knocking a load down. And there is no correlation really between the climate emergency and planning policy and guidance. It seems at this moment in time. So if you've got an air quality management zone, for instance, and you've got a planning application that sits near the air quality management zone, the reply you get back is it doesn't sit within. Yeah, but you're putting the traffic on the same roads as the air quality management zone, and it sits right next to it, and you're knocking a load of trees down to actually make that development. So where is the balance between the White Forest, that's obviously a major project that we're involved in, and planning policy and guidance, so that air quality management zones and climate change is reflected in that planning as well? Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. Matthias Franklin, Head of Planning. Fundamentally, planning is the issue of climate change and the declaration of a climate emergency is not new to planning. Sustainable development has been a cornerstone of planning policy and the formation of planning policy, and therefore it's not a new issue, this, to planning, tackling the climate change and responding to a climate emergency. The local plan policies So the adopted development plan for Kirklees contains a number of policies specifically to improve matters such as tree retention, new tree planting, air quality, promoting renewable forms of energy generation. Indeed, the very essence of the local plan and the allocation of housing is about where the most sustainable locations are in the borough for the right type of housing, the right type of employment, limiting transport need or private car need, and promoting forms of non-private car-based travel. So I think it's perhaps around the communication that the narrative between planning policy and climate emergency don't sit side by side. They are intertwined at their very core, and therefore, so the planning policy that we have is very up to date. The evidence base is very new. Our colleagues in public health and in public protection, who do help us, advise us on things like air quality, are using guidance that was created at a combined authority level, the West Yorkshire Low Emission Strategy, and where there are opportunities for improving air quality through development, those are taken. Planning conditions are attached, such as the electric charging scheme that comes onto all new developments. So although we could do more, I wouldn't say that we aren't doing anything, and I wouldn't have said that the local plan wouldn't have been found sound if it hadn't have responded to the basic principles of sustainable development. So I hope that's helpful.
I think as well, where we're coming from as well, is there are now more air quality management zones than there were when the local plan was put through. So there doesn't seem to be any correlation between actually re-looking at those areas and looking to see if what you're going to be doing, it would be actually adding to. It is, new housing, yes, electric charging points, yes. But you're actually putting more vehicles on roads where there are problems already, and the tree cover is not necessarily what it was before the planning application was. And I'm not getting into any specific planning applications because that's not the role of scrutiny, right? But it's the policies and getting that tie-up that I think should be far stronger. And that's why I'm wanting to know about the air quality management zones in particular.
Is it okay to come back on just to clarify? So in terms of policy formation, we have our up-to-date local plan. We know how many houses the borough needs. We know what the job aspirations are. What we are developing as a service behind the local plan is a series of planning policy guidance booklets, effectively, that will say what is good design in Kirklees, how do we respond to the climate emergency, how do we deal with things like viability, all of the facets that make up planning. So we are alive to that, and although we do have a bespoke air quality document already in play, and we've had that since 2017, and that's the cornerstone to advising us on sensitive uses near air quality issues. So there are more air quality issues. Trees do get taken down on occasion to facilitate development, but the council's local plan policy would say we should keep our trees wherever we possibly can, and plant more in replacements wherever possible. Okay.
Can I just quickly build on what Matthias has said? If you look through the evidence that supports the local plan development, although that we have declared additional air quality management areas since the local plan was adopted, we actually were looking, we sort of had the existing local air quality management areas in mind at the time. We knew what the air quality issues were leading up to that point. So we built the local plan, or our advice to the local plan was based on the fact that those air quality management areas were going to be declared. It wasn't something that happened in a point in time. We knew what the evidence was leading up to that point. So if you do look through the evidence associated with the local plan, we already knew what the air quality issues were in the district, and it was all borne in mind as we went through.
I'm not going into a long discussion on it because there's plenty more questions, but it does seem strange that there is a lot of development around some air quality management zones already.
Thank you, Chair. I'll be very quick. First, I want to talk about some of the good stuff. So, the Climate Commission and the Green Charter, I think are a really positive step forwards, and, hopefully we'll see that in place very soon. We're talking about the first meeting in May, potentially. So congratulations on that. And I do want to mention the heat network. I think it's great to see the business case in place. John, well done to you and your commitment on that. I know that's something that you've been pushing for some time. So, that's great, really. I think one of the things we have to think about overall is around infrastructure versus behaviour change. And, looking at the two phases, it's looking at how do we balance those things out. Now, some of this stuff is not just in Kirklees' hand. Actually, some of it's about policy at a regional level or at a national level. So when we're looking at transport, overall what we want to see is less use of private vehicles, whatever they are, whether they're electric or petrol, obviously. I know, Martin, you mentioned Bradley, it's great to see the traffic light management system. What we'd like to see is more public transport, more buses on Bradley Road, but we know right now that's not in our hands. So it would be interesting to know, for example, through the devolution deal, what asks and pushes are we doing around the climate change agenda, around transport specifically. I know in Greater Manchester they've been able to put together a 16 to 18-year-old pass for free bus use as well on that, which perhaps potentially that's something we could do under devolution as well. And this is a free pass for 16 to 18-year-olds and around cultural pass as well. So it would be interesting to know a little bit more on that. But overall for me, it's those two things, like how much are we prioritising our infrastructure and our decision making around climate change, and the big major infrastructure projects as opposed to behaviour change.
I think I can probably respond on that. Shall I respond on that? Thank you. It's a good point on infrastructure versus behaviour change, and I think it's to an extent it is informed by the evidence base. I think it's easier to generate evidence base for behavioural type interventions. Some of the infrastructure projects are very complicated. The heat network, as some people will know, there's been a number of sort of failed attempts at establishing a heat network in Huddersfield. The current iteration has probably been on the go since 2012, and it has been an area of policy that's been consistently supported by government, both in terms of officers and in terms of development funding in that time, and it has paid dividends. So I think other infrastructure priorities have to sort of get that same kind of development and support. And I'll just quickly skip to this slide. If you look at the bottom point, it's gone now, isn't it? Sorry, anyway, there's two regional working projects. The first is the North and West Yorkshire emissions reduction pathways. That's looking at, through to the 2038 target, is looking at what will happen, what will West Yorkshire need to do over that period in terms of achieving the emissions reductions across different sectors. It's in the early stages at the moment. We have a seat on the steering group, both in terms of, I think you sit on it, Councillor Cooper? Yes, and as a councillor, and also as officers as well, shaping up to be a very interesting piece of work. That'll be really helpful, particularly informing the type of intervention that's needed in transportation terms, but also in terms of the built environment. The second one is a West Yorkshire Combined Authority project looking at developing a methodology that's consistent across the city region for carbon impact assessment methodology associated with projects. So I would say that's going to be extremely useful for larger infrastructure schemes, such as transport schemes, but effectively anything that gets funding via the regional body, the Combined Authority, will have to align with this anyway. So that will be a really useful piece of work to help us then prioritise and develop what we put forward.
Currently, there is a survey going on at the moment, online survey about buses. So anybody who is listening to this or sitting in this room that hasn't taken part, it's your opportunity to tell us. And I think the greatest thing we can do is to be able to control public transport, especially buses. And I'm always looking at schemes in other places that we can try out.
Just very quickly, on the programme on page 16, you've got one of the projects to develop a Kirklees Youth Summit and campaign for engaging young people around the climate emergency. Now, within that, you've listed that it's going to be an officer group. Is there going to be any young people engagement within that group? How is it that you're going forward in planning that or delivering that without the young people's involvement within that?
Yeah, that is a very good question. I suppose the officer group has been set up to look at the best way of establishing a youth summit and a related programme of engagement with young people. So in a way, it's what needs to happen in the background to reach that end point. So one of the first actions of the officer group is looking at what is happening already across the district in terms of groups that are community groups, actions that are already taking place in schools, and looking at how we can work with them. Because I think we're all mindful that it probably won't work very well if it's just the council going in there telling people this is what the council thinks, which isn't what the intention is.
So in terms of the delivery of the summit, are the young people going to be part of the delivery on the day or as part of the project? Because you've just gone round explaining the process, but in terms of the actual delivery, how is that going to work on the ground?
It's still being developed, but definitely at the moment it's envisaged that the young people have a key role. Absolutely, wherever possible. Yeah.
Yeah, can we ask, is the Kirklees Youth Council going to be involved in the development and etc.?
I think Kirklees Youth Council is actually on board, and it is young people who will be organising, who will be putting together the programme, whereas the adults will be in the background running through the process. It may not come across that, but we're actually just beginning to set up, and it is one of the young people who came to me and said, when can we meet? So all the officers are going to meet in order to ensure that young people are at the heart. This is their programme. They will run the day, and they will make recommendations, which we will take on board.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think what we're saying is there should be greater involvement of young people from the start. Right, so Councillor Bolt, you've waited very patiently for your question.
Thank you, Chair. Couple of points that have come up. We've talked about sustainable schools. I was hoping that during that item, Councillor Mather would have given us an update on the Cabinet decision which was taken a while ago, where Cabinet decided we're going to take away bus passes from young people and buy them push bikes instead and give them cycle training. We've heard nothing more about that. That was a fiscal saving that they were going to do, but we seem to be having a reversal now of talk about putting back on buses, which is great if there's buses. Could we have an update on that? Are there any plans to make the stadium, which the council is a 40% shareholder, sustainable? Yeah, every time the town play, and thankfully we're getting 20,000 people there at a match, the traffic is nose to tail on Leeds Road, which is doing nothing for congestion and air quality. Why aren't we working with our partners to get people, football fans seem to have no problem sharing transport when they go to away matches. Surely the council can do something at home matches. Looking at trees, a lot's been said on that, and obviously in this case sometimes you can't see the wood for the trees. Can we have some net figures on the trees? We've had lots of gross figures, and some of them may be really gross, but I want to see the net impact, because what's the effectiveness for the borough when we talk about planting trees, where in key areas like the Cooper Bridge bypass and the Bradley housing, swathes of established trees are being chopped down. It's all right saying we're greening the A62. What's the difference between putting saplings on the A62 against something like a moss tree or a moss wall, which we heard at West Yorkshire, a moss tree or a moss wall can absorb the same pollutants as 270 trees. But moss trees are being seen by planning as landscaping rather than effective air quality. It's great to hear, Rob, we were talking about the council growing its own trees. Perhaps we could use something like a nursery in Bradley for that. Or indeed, we could talk to Vandenberg, who are one of the big Dutch companies who are setting up a tree growing facility in Murfield. So, electric charging. We talked about electric vehicles. What is the Cabinet member and the Council doing about e-bikes? Electric bikes are a big market, helping people of all aspects. You see more and more of them. And does Councillor Mather think that it's right to allocate 2 e-vehicle charging play down at Oldgate and one of them for a taxi when there's no taxi ranks anywhere near it?
Okay. Who wants to take those points then, please?
Okay, Councillor Bolt, in relation to taking away bus passes some time ago, that was because it was felt that young people had bus passes which we paid for but weren't being used. So it doesn't mean we're going to take the money away and we can't look at more innovative schemes of how bus journeys should be had, or getting young people out of private cars onto public transport. So we are still looking, so it hasn't gone away. The stadium is definitely going to be on board. In fact, John and I were just at a meeting last week, and yes, we are looking at how they can be involved in our climate change initiatives, and they are keen to get on board. In terms of next figures on trees and moss trees and walls, actually, I am very keen to look at what people are doing, and we have discussed moss trees and moss walls, whether be it as landscaping going to the future or something else. We are definitely looking at all the ideas that we have here and being tried elsewhere. In terms of electric charging points, yes, e-bikes is something we're looking at. I'm looking at in relation to putting our house in orders, moving forward and looking at some kind of incentive schemes for our workforce, especially relating to the ones that the National Health Service seems to run for incentives for electric cars. Why not e-bikes? I'm making sure as we move forward, those electric charging points also have the capacity to charge those e-bikes. And Martin, he's still here. Martin mentioned that, it's quite difficult to have aspirations, but when you get out there to put the practicalities down, it's difficult. So, for example, the Oldgate site, there are no taxi ranks around there. We're hoping that through our communications that we can tell electric taxis that we do have a charging point. But moving forward again, we need to make sure that we have evidence base.
Okay, thank you. Right, I'm going to summarise then now. So I think what we were mentioning was about maybe things moving quite slowly in some places. It's picking up pace. But what was mentioned was about not a lot of carbon being saved at this moment in time. So we need to look at that happening quicker. Young people involvement more in the youth summit. In fact, I'm surprised they haven't already been involved. I would have thought that would have been a key. Involved in the working group. So I would have thought the Youth Summit should have been involved a lot earlier than this. We also mentioned about existing housing as well as new housing and looking at schemes for existing housing. Schools, and there was involvement with schools, and I wondered if local elected members would also like to have involvement in that, because in the walking, etc. for schools, I think that would be good if there were. Please give accurate communication messages. I think that is key. And more communication on your planning guidance. And consider having a cycling policy as well as part of this this action plan as well. Have I covered everything that everybody's mentioned? Yes? Yeah? I know you have a cycling policy already, but what is it doing in relation to climate emergency? Okay. All right. So I think we'll end this item and move swiftly to the flooding strategy, please. Thank you. Right, so we'll have 2 minutes while everybody moves around. So, thank you for that. We now move to the next item, which is on the flood risk management strategy, which comes to scrutiny every year for an update, and this is our annual update. Thank you. Do you want to introduce yourself before you speak? Thank you.
Hi, my name is Rashid Mahmood. I'm the new flood manager. I started this year, so I'm going to keep it brief. I just want to go through the strategy. I'll quickly run through the objectives, and then I'll hope to move on to the action plan document and just quickly review the progress on the actions. The 2019 strategy's main objectives kind of set out in improving the understanding of the local flood risk within the LLFA. It set out to also increase the understanding of the local flood risk amongst partners. It's about working with local communities and everybody trying to understand their responsibilities and then maximising the benefits by working with partnerships, colleagues like Environmental Agency and the other risk management authorities. It's about actively managing the flood risk associated with new development proposals. It's about taking a sustainable approach, improve and maintain the capacity of existing drainage systems, encourage proactive, responsible maintenance of privately owned flood defence and drainage assets. And then at the end, it goes on, picking up issues on planning policies, working with the local plan, working with colleagues in planning, maximising opportunities to reduce surface water runoff from the upper catchments, and then focusing on projects and programmes and what we could do in making things better in the future. And then the last bullet point on the objectives just touches on the local FRM knowledge, make sure it's aligned with the Council's emergency planning procedures. So that kind of summarises the objectives of the strategy. And then if we move on to the action plan, it focuses on what were originally 32 objectives, now they're down to 11 objectives, action plans, should I say. And action plan 1.1, the measure there is about assessing high flood risk locations. We've done a number of studies now And from February 2019, we've done one in Millsbridge and Galka, Linthwaite, Birkby, and the North Murfield. Action 1.2 is about improving skills and knowledge of the team and the officers. Since last time, I think my predecessor spoke, we spoke about graduate engineer. That still maintains, still is the case. We are developing the skills within the team. We do get technical consultants supporting us with the technical knowledge. We also have a local undergraduate program that visits us on an annual basis. And that continues. Action 2.1 is about publishing and distributing information. Responsibilities about flood risk, that's ongoing since 2018. We visited a number of wards, and given the recent flood events, we're going to obviously improve on that, make pace, and I've got future community events that we're hoping to do. Action 2.2, improving local communities and local initiatives and schemes. That's going to be another key focus for us this year going forward. It's about drafting information, distributing it amongst communities, engaging with communities, and residents as well as the local authority is aware of each other's responsibilities. Action 3.1, it was about identifying high-risk open and culverted workcourses, highway drains and drainage flood features. This is about installing the asset, and the progress is going very well. We've got a culvert programme that's in place. It's been progressing for 4 years. It's in its last 2 years. That's been progressing pretty well, and that continues to be the case for this year. We've got capacity improvement recommendation that we're making from the flood risk studies. Action 3.2 talks about cyclic maintenance regime based on risk. And we are doing that, we're progressing that. We have trash grill maintenance. It's in a 1 monthly, 2 monthly and 6 monthly. Our main high-risk trash grills are visited on a monthly basis. We've introduced telemetry to our gully cleansing system, and this is all about making us more efficient and effective going forward. Action 4.1 is about identifying high-risk flood defences. It's about asset management. That's still work in progress, and as we continue to learn about the network and the assets, we upgrade that and put that on our GIS systems. Action 4.2 is about technical advice for owners, guiding them in preparing local maintenance plans. I understand that's completed, and it will continue to develop. 5.1 is talking about proposals to engage with landowners to embrace land management techniques, initiatives to help to reduce the rate of surface runoff. My colleague earlier, Rob Dalby, talked about the resident NFM. That's the National Flood Management techniques that we're working with Councillor Walker in the Corner and Home catchments, operational catchments. And working closely with groups, as it says, in Home and Corn valleys. We're on Action 6.1, it's the second of the last. Is to develop a pragmatic programme and schemes, initiatives which are likely to fund through the national programme and local level. This is going to be another one of our high priority initiatives going forward. Is complete the studies, understand what the reasons and recommendations are made within them studies, and work with our partners in trying to get the funding needed to deliver them projects. And one of the last actions is embed the local flood risk management strategy into response and recovery plans. That's working with emergency procedures. LAGO completed the flood management operational plan was revised in October 2019. And that's a summary of the actions. Thank you very much.
Questions then? Councillor Cooper and then Councillor Marchington.
Okay, one or two thoughts. The recent flooding events that we had, or in some cases nearly had, one of which I was in Armitage Bridge during Kiara, and one of the issues that was there was some houses were threatened with flooding because there wasn't a drain clearage. We had to clear a drain, had to get a drain out to clear it. So one of the things here about reducing risk, I think, is ensuring we got proper drain clearage. We had to unblock a drain to stop a huge puddle going down into some terraces, and so the council's role there in that, I think, is quite important. target hardening. There are areas, Armitage Bridge is the area I'm most familiar with, which has risk. And we've had 2 flood events there over the last 15 years, two major flood events. One of the solutions to that, which may be helpful in other areas, this was associated with a beck. It was a flood wall that was placed, which allowed water to go through, but then pushed it back. It's very much a local solution into a field, which became its own sort of floodplain. And so that was a community solution, which has worked to a large extent, and but is designed and paid for within the community. We put some ward funds towards it as well. So those sort of community solutions are important. Other things, sandbags. There was lots of people wanting sandbags, and the council wasn't able to respond to that, saying we don't do this. And so I wonder about whether there needs to be a more distributed supply of sandbags that could be available to community level to be able to deal with that. I think it would be really helpful as local councillors to have a garage with sandbags, even if it's just enough to do a few houses which are at risk. That would give us that ability to provide an immediate response. We went to Armitage Bridge during Chiara because people couldn't get through to council services. People rang us saying we can't get through. And we were able to help and respond, and we stopped a couple of houses being flooded effectively with help from the community. So community solutions, I think, are part of it. I think some great work being done on clearing trash grills. That was one of the major issues which affected Armitage Bridge in the past. So I'm aware of some really good work that goes on in the council. I just think there's some ways we could tighten things up. I think the council has learned from the mass we had in over Chiara. Just one quick question: the 1%. There's this figure of 1% chance of there being an event here. Now, what worries me is that as climate change takes hold and events become more frequent, how we actually going to be able to respond to that. Are we responding to a changing situation or looking at an existing situation? So how far can we futurecast the problems that are going to come in 5, 10, 15, 20 years' time?
I'll pick on the issue of community engagement. I think that's certainly the way forward. That's something that we're going to really do at a pace, work with residents, work with community groups. And one of the initiatives we are trying to develop going forward is a flood warden initiative, where we work with communities and try and get a lead person that can give us the intelligence. Quite often when flooding happens, it happens at once and it happens across the district. And resources are limited, and quite often we don't have the intelligence to say which one to go to first. And I think going forward, we are going to establish the flood wardens. We are going to work in communities and trying to provide the training. There is a scheme called the Pathfinder Project that EU have initiated, and it's about establishing flood hubs. It's about communicating with residents and trying to explain to them how these issues come about and what they could do. So that's definitely something we'd agree to Council Group, but that's something we'd support going forward. The issue on the 1% AEP is it is, I mean, we ask this question of Environmental Agency all the time. The 1 in 100 year event, they want to stop using that term because it gives the impression that something's going to happen every 100 months, every 100 years. That isn't the case. Climate change is changing that. It's changing that understanding, and the hydrologists that are working within EA are trying to redefine that, what that actually means, and we kind of sat back trying to wait for that information to come forward. And quite often I hear, what is a 1 in 100 year event? Well, some people say, well, what we thought it was is actually happening more often. Yeah. So what is that? What does it look like?
So if it happens once, it shouldn't happen for the next 99 years.
That's right. So they're trying not to use that description anymore going forward, because it's not the same. It's climate change has had an impact. So we're sat back and trying to understand that, working with the Environmental Agency. But it is what what we do allow climate change in the calculation. When I first looked in, it was 20%, now it's 30%. Now it's climbed to 40% to make allowances for this, and sometimes we introduce creep, 10% urban creep into that equation. So we are trying to factor up to make account for that. But it is work in progress with a lot of the universities and with the other issue about the sandbags. I don't work in highways. It is their policy, but it has to be imminent to see the issue with sandbags. And quite often sandbags, people, I think communities need to understand the kind of flooding that we had in sort of Storm Care. A sandbag wouldn't going to resist that. It wouldn't resist that. You can put floodgates in, you can put air vents in. It'll just make its way through the wall. Depending on topography, it'll come underneath the house. And I think for us, it's about educating the residents about these risks and how they best manage that going forward. So, yeah.
So things like polyurethane foam for as walls, which acts as a flood barrier. There's those. I mean, there are a number of things which you can do.
That's right. Yeah. There's the floodgates you can put air vents in, non-return valves in. And they all, I won't say I'm an expert in those fields, but they might give you protection for about 2 hours, but when you get a storm care that's building up the pressure of it itself, it actually makes its way through the walls. And that's not what... so it's us explaining, and probably our job for the year is to educate the locals about that, and hopefully that will help to... it's about making the communities more resilient, I think, going forward. I think this idea of flood prevention isn't going to happen over this year. Preventing floods, the climate change is real, it is challenging. The infrastructure that's in the ground that's been there for probably 50, 100 years. And it's a question of trying to make communities more resilient, certainly in the short term, as we plan for the programme and projects for the long term.
Yeah, thank you again for your presentation, really interesting. I want to focus on the 3.2 about public clearing and telemetry and collecting new information. I'm glad you mentioned those, because again, you've got an example there of stuff in the past that's worked really well, and that flooding at Bridge Top, 7 or 8 years ago, a lot of work done actually because it backed up through the drains. Bridge Top is actually below the level of the river Cone. We didn't have any flooding on the south side of that part of the Cone Valley at this time. What happened was, the river flowing down Market Street from north to south, and that's, I've not like seen anything like that in my lifetime. I've experienced sort of events where it's come back up, as you say, come back up through and again, it's about mapping. I'm sorry. Oh yeah, just shout at me, that's fine. So about using the telemetry to map changing patterns of, where things have happened that have not happened before. And obviously we've had this, the wettest February in, however many hundred, since 1868, so it would have really tested what's going on. I know Matthias, we've talked about temporary drainage during building schemes, and the building that's going on, the significant amount of building that's going to be going on in the borough over the next 15 to 20 years, mapping the impact that, we look at localised schemes about drinking water, and so it's then the, it's knitting that all together, isn't it? What are the strategic impacts of that development on other areas downstream? So it'd be interesting to know how we're mapping that, how the telemetry is helping with that. The other thing I'm really pleased to see in this is about surface water drainage, and it is different for, in valley areas where, I'm appreciating some parts of the borough we're getting water coming up there. That looks to be about Dalton, you can understand the River Cone, Lower Cone catchment, but in the Upper Cone catchment it is about what happens to the water between it coming, falling on the hillsides, coming down until it gets to the river. So I suppose, the question is about how we're using the telemetry to map the changing patterns of, for me, surface water problems.
Well, the telemetry that we're referring to is basically a form of technology that will allow us to see or to tell us remotely that the gully has filled up, it's silted up. And the idea is that we maintain the gullies on a set route, and it's the same route as the winter grit. But the telemetry is going to tell us which gullies are going to require a regular frequency. Either it's because it's next to a tree or it's in a low area. So then what we can do with that information is then direct our operations team to just focus on those gullies. So if a gully needs to be visited, I don't know, every month or every week, that telemetry information will give us that information, so we can put that particular gully on a more frequent visit. And that's what the telemetry is. And we are looking to extend that because it's this knowledge that we need to collect, and it's this knowledge that's going to allow us to become more efficient in our maintenance, limited budgets in maintenance going forward. And we certainly want to extend that to include trash grills and water courses as well when they get blocked up. It's a similar technology that EA use, and this is something that we are thinking about considering using and extending onto our ordinary water courses as well as the main water courses.
Thanks for that. If it's possible to give councils information about how that's been working in their wards, I mean, even if it's on a pilot basis, and how it might be extended across the borough. I think I'd certainly be interested in looking at it from our ward, and perhaps other councils would benefit from that as well. So, not for today, but at another stage. Thank you.
Thank you. My question slightly follows on from Councillor Marchington's in terms of some of the data that we may have collected. We're talking about community engagement and how we're going to be educating communities. Have we actually collected that data, and are we going to be looking at how we prioritise certain communities where we will go in and educate them in terms of what to do and how to do? That's it.
Yeah, I mean, there's been a number of studies that my producer has done with within the Kirklees district. One that we are expecting from a consultant is coming, expecting it around about April time. It's the actual surface water flood risk outside within the entire Kirklees district, and that's going to help for us to focus on the areas that the consultant feels are at highest risk, and those will be the areas that we'll be focusing on going forward. So we do have some intelligence. We've had reports in the past, and the action plan report does actually highlight some of the areas. It actually lists out the business that we estimate are at risk, and those are going to be our areas that we're going to be focused on going forward.
Thank you. I think a lot of my stuff's been covered as well. So obviously, I think as a councillor, the things that come up is communication. So I think residents feeling at least they know what to do if a situation like this occurs. And I think the first flood event, I can't remember which one it was called, Kiara or Dan or Stan or whatever it was, the first one. Yeah. I think, Kiara. Dennis was the next one. Yeah. Some people did just struggle to get through on the phone line. I know that was a key thing. So I guess it's just how we make people aware through different means of communication as well, because sometimes they just want something out there that they can look at and go, oh, actually, yeah, I am doing the right things, or what do I need to do just to try and make myself a little bit more safer. And drains always come up, and I know, the other day when I was doing my leafleting, I was having to take pictures of drains because they just get clogged up so quickly, and I guess we've got a role to play in terms of highlighting that to yourselves as well, or just making sure our constituents are aware that they can ring a number very, very quickly and at least make you aware. And then obviously there'll be some sort of process in terms of what you prioritise, won't they, as well. The other thing I just wanted to ask was about housing, really. So I sit on a sub-planning committee for Huddersfield, and the flood zones come up all the time, don't they? And a lot of time we don't get, for us as council, you don't get a whole lot of information from the Environment Agency. It's usually a couple of sentences or so. And sometimes I think we feel, although you're hearing from the Environment Agency, it's okay, or like when you're at the outline stage, you're kind of being told, well, we'll look at the detail later. A lot of times I feel quite worried about it. I'm not sure I have the amount of information I would want to assess whether housing should go there or not, and the impact it's going to have overall. And I think that's, it's something I would want to look at in a little bit more detail, or understand it a little bit more about how we're reviewing that process.
I think, obviously, the Environment Agency owns the strategic flood risk maps. That's where they identify the highest areas of risk. And that was obviously a crucial bit of data that informed where we allocated land for housing and employment and so on. So that data's in that context. I think there's two parts. There's something about training for members as well, and learning the technical issues of how you assess planning applications in relation to flood risk. So perhaps that's something for us to pick up with members at committee on their annual trainings and as part of the refreshers. In terms of Main River, that's then Environment Agency responsibility. The lead local flood authority, which Rashid's team effectively performs that function, will advise on planning applications and the acceptability of it. The general thrust is you shouldn't add to flood risk, and you shouldn't add to any flood risks elsewhere, and development wherever possible and practical should reduce the flood risk from a site. Largely what you get with most fields is they're unregulated, unmanaged, that the runoff, the amount of water they contain and how quickly the water moves off and causes flooding is because that's an uncontrolled environment. Whereas I'm not saying development is a panacea, but development introduces a managed storage system for water, whether that be the percolation through the ground, soak away, or whether it's in a storage tank and that the amount of water that's released from that storage tank is through a controlled flow system. So you should be able to improve with new design, clever design and appropriate data, an improved drainage situation from an unmanaged field. So that's generally where we try to get to. The challenge is around making sure that we can get the water from the site to the appropriate water course, whether that's through the sewer system, if the Yorkshire Water agree that, or if we can tap into an existing water course nearby and we know where that will then flow to an outlet. So there is a level of technical understanding we probably need to help members with, and I'm very alive to that, so I can pick that up with the chairs of the planning committee certainly. But equally, because we are in a plan-led system, the majority of our new housing, the vast majority, is going on sites that both the lead local flood authority, the water agency, Yorkshire Water, and importantly the Environment Agency have assessed as being the most suitable locations for development in the borough. So having a plan should improve our resilience over the course of the lifetime of the plan if we keep putting housing where it's meant to be, as opposed to an uncontrolled situation, which is perhaps where we were when we had scenarios where we didn't have our 5-year housing land supply and we weren't able to direct development where we wanted. So I think the council's in a fairly strong position to help, but it takes time to build these things out, of course. If that helps.
I think you're right, and I'd welcome the technical training. I know sometimes I do feel uncomfortable sometimes when I'm looking at the risk, the zone, flood risk zone assessments. And you do have to weigh up against housing, but sometimes that extra development does cause issues elsewhere as well. The other thing for me is just on the construction phase, like we've got a couple of developments in my ward, and during construction phase, and because we've had the heavy rain, it has actually caused some real problems. And then the drainage enforcement is really crucial as well for me, and it's just making sure we're keeping on top of that.
Yeah. I'm aware of the sites that you're talking about. We won't get into specifics. And clearly there is an element of disruption when construction happens. It's the nature of the activity, but there are planning conditions and requirements on developers so that they limit their impacts. So the temporary drainage arrangements should be in place, but they should be a living document as well. Perhaps they put them in, and if there's extreme events, they might need to be altered because there wasn't either enough capacity or it was so extreme that we didn't expect that much water, and therefore there were issues. But we are proactively going out to manage the major sites, the big sites. We are working closely with our colleagues across the technical parts of the council, and where developers are causing real issue, and our compliance strategy says this, we will take action to bring them back into compliance, and we'll either ask them to stop, and they'll do that voluntarily, whilst they get right any issues that have happened on site. Because it's not about punishing, it's about working to solve the problem with developers. But we want to do that much quicker than perhaps has happened in the past, and I think developers are alive to that. So certainly in your ward, in the examples you were referring to, after the extreme events that we did have, those sites were visited, a number of changes were being made, and our specialist engineers were content that what the developer was doing in the time frame they were solving the problem was the right approach, as opposed to stopping a developer straight away. So within a short space of time, After that extreme event, we were satisfied that they were back in compliance with their planning permission in relation to temporary drainage.
Okay, thank you. Can I ask about telemetry? I want to just pick up on that telemetry point again, just quickly. How that actually works, because you're talking about the gullies being cleaned on a regular basis and things like this. I know of an example where it doesn't have to be a storm for a road to flood. It just has to be heavy rain. And it is the most, I report the gullies on that road the most often than any other gullies in my ward. But it doesn't seem to be picked up in telemetry as to how those gullies should be cleared out or whatever, or the problem looked at in more greater depth, than just we keep going around in circles with it. So it is how the telemetry is being used to actually solve problems before we actually have storms, so that in places that are not necessarily near to rivers or canals or whatever that may overflow, that the actual problems with surface water are actually looked at in greater depth, so that we can reduce the flood risk in those areas at least. And also on the telemetry, are you working with the Environment Agency in looking at what the pattern of flooding is across Kirklees in the various incidents that we've had? And is the flood risk still appropriate for those flood risk levels still appropriate for those areas that have been most affected every time that we've had a problem?
Actually, I'll start with the telemetry. Well, telemetry it's a recent initiative of the councils. It's probably started around about August, September. So the data is coming in. So I mean, I'd forecast we'd need at least 12 months of input, just to get an appreciation of what the information that's telling us. So it is a new initiative, and the hope is that we could target those gullies that need it more often than they currently get. So it is work in progress, and we would need at least 12 months of data. And the other part of the question, we're constantly working with the Environmental Agency. The recent storm events that we had in February, we have collected a database that basically looks at every property that's been internally flooded in business, and then looked at the cause of that. And that will change our view of areas that flood within Kirklees, there's no doubt about that. And we are trying to now going to capture them into wards going forward, so then we can advise members equally what we've learned on the back of these storm events. So we are gathering that intelligence, and we are going to put it into a form that's beneficial to both of us and to members going forward.
And on the planning side, the National Planning Policy on planning and flood risk mentions about a sequential test to steer new development to areas with the lowest risk of flooding, and development should not be allocated and permitted if there are reasonable available sites appropriate with lower risk of flooding. So when you were mentioning about now we have the local plan, we can do that, has there been consequences of the local plan steering new development to areas of lowest flood risk? Is the local plan and the policies within it sufficient to do that?
Clearly the answer there is those sites have been through a sustainability assessment, which includes the EA. The majority of the sites in the local plan are in areas of lowest flood risk. That doesn't mean that there aren't some sites where there are elements of flood zone 2 or 3. We would always try to steer new development away from any flood zone 3 area, because that's the highest risk. Then there's flood zone 2, and that depends on. But if it's an allocated site for housing, then that is an appropriate location for housing in principle, subject to getting the layouts, the details, the other material considerations right. So I think on the whole, the plan will help avoid scenarios where we are, as Councillor Uppal suggested, under pressure for housing, because we must use our land efficiently, so we must get as many the right numbers of houses, the right sizes of houses on the land that we've allocated. And therefore, if those builders come through and deliver on those planning permissions and keep the supply, we keep the supply high through granting of the appropriate schemes, developers build out those permissions, I think that protects the council from a scenario where it may have to boost housing numbers by looking at sites of higher risk, which the MPPF would discourage. But you read the MPPF in the whole, because planning is read in the whole, and you balance out the priorities of housing and risk. Now, at the minute, I think our local plan, because it's up to date, because we maintain a 5-year housing land supply, we are in a good place to ensure that development is on sites we've identified as suitable for housing. That doesn't mean that all housing goes on allocations, because we have a windfall element requirement, around 400 every year of our 1,700 target would be from sites we don't know about windfall. But we would apply the principles of our local plan policies on flood risk, which is backed up by what the MPPF says around pointing them in the direction of lowest risk. And whilst we're in a good planning position of supply, we are in a good position to say what's appropriate locations.
So it also talks about an exception test, etc. If you can't find any other appropriate sites. But what I'm really asking as well is if you are going to relook at any of those policies and any of those areas with the Environment Agency, etc., to make sure that what you have is a robust risk management in those areas.
We always require flood risk assessments with planning applications, detailed planning applications. And obviously we're promoting a plan-led approach to housing in Kirklees. In terms of the working with the EA, as Rashid said, we work very closely with our EA partners. They will have been out doing an awful lot of data gathering as a result of the recent storm events. They do consistently review the modelling to make sure it's fit for purpose in relation to what we know happened. And periodically they will review those strategic flood risk maps in light of new data. So we've had some storm events that could be reviewed over the course of the year, and any changes could be picked up then, if they're required.
I shall try, but obviously flooding is I know it's of input. An administrative point first, Chair, please. I wonder if, and it's a shame for the benefit of the webcam, it's a shame that the Cabinet members haven't stayed. Part of the scrutiny is to hold Cabinet members to account. I was wanting to ask about the administrative or the progress of this report before it gets here. Having been a Cabinet member some years ago, prior to reports going to the public, the Cabinet members would either have a personal briefing or have a Cabinet briefing. Because I noticed, Chair, that this report was signed off for publication on the 25th of February by the directors. That was the date when I went to Cabinet and asked about this review, because I'd looked back and seen when they were coming up. On the 25th of February Cabinet meeting, Cabinet were oblivious to what was happening. Nobody could answer. So I'd like to know what the dates were, and was it shared with Cabinet before then? Communication has been mentioned a few times today, and I think we need to be using the now enhanced communication service to be telling people about the money which is available. And I don't know if officers can actually answer what's the net contribution to council in terms of community recovery grant, business recovery grant, council tax discount, business rates relief. Because we heard again on the 25th of February, we had a Cabinet report about that. But as I'm sure Harpreet got a copy of the letter from Robert Jenrick through the office, government was actually giving a lot of that money to the councils. And in addition, DEFRA will be announcing the Property Flood Resilience Grant, £5,000 for businesses and homes to help them make changes to reduce damage levels. Now, those businesses and homes can combine that resource to give a bigger resilience, because the report worryingly says in broad terms, and unfortunately the pages of the appendix aren't numbered, but it talks about major flood defence schemes to reduce the risk to property are likely to be unaffordable. I'd like to know how you assess unaffordability when you have businesses in Mirfield, one of which is the European manufacturing arm of a major pharmaceutical company. You've got a mill business with 33 small businesses in, and they are saying if we get flooded again, we will leave the area. How do you assess economic affordability? And what's the impact on Kirklees businesses? The data on the chart about businesses affected says that 38 businesses in Mirfield are affected from fluvial or river risk. Given that there's 34 in Homebank Mills alone, I think that is an underestimate. You know, there are many, many more. And again, communication. We can't rely on people seeing something in the press, seeing something on a council website. The council has, over from Storm Eva in 2015, has got data on businesses which were affected. We ought to be getting out there and telling people that the council can support them on this. We've heard about natural flood management earlier on. I think the council needs to take a more proactive approach in this. The Calderdale approach is very much community-led. Certainly from a Mirfield perspective, where we are at the confluence of the Home, Colne and Calder, we can't wait for the communities in Meltham, Marsden or up in the Home Valley to start putting bits of wood across streams and hoping it holds back. You know, you need to see major interventions. Some of these, as happens in other areas, is creating, I think Andrew alluded to it, creating washlands. There's areas which wouldn't suffer if they were to flood for a short time. And we need to be looking at that. I'm just looking at the salient points, Chair. Matthias has talked about the planning, and I think we ought to have a more robust and challenging approach in planning to when developments come forward. A picture speaks 1,000 words, so if Scrutiny would like to look. I'm just circulating a picture, Chair, of Granny Lane at Mirfield. That was deemed a suitable location, and again, controversially, someone said it was worth taking the risk. The field to the right is where the housing has been allocated. The road where you can see the vehicles going through, Stennard Lane, frequently is obstructed to traffic. And this is supposed to be the lowest flood risk. An officer decision. There you go. Another picture, Hopton Care Cottages. That was a decision which was an officer decision to allow a care community in Lower Hopton, which is cut off during periods, and where the planning application on review said that evacuation would be by a bridge to the west of the site. That bridge was owned by Network Rail. The applicant had no right of access, and that bridge is now closed. You can't get out through that. So I think, as colleagues have alluded, we need more understanding and we need a more robust approach. Developers need challenging on statements, and for the benefit of people in Mirfield, you may be able to build a house above the flood risk, but the impact on the surrounding environment, as we heard when we were on site with the lead local flood authority, sometimes builders are not as open and transparent as you might like and might leave things out, as we saw on a social housing project where a permeable car park has never been swept and therefore is useless. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, so do you want to address the questions of developers' responsibilities and also about community support as well? Because I think you've mentioned previously as well, haven't you, about having flood wardens and things like this, and how you're supporting businesses and how you're assessing how many people in an area actually have been affected by the floods, I think.
Well, I can start by saying we are expecting a study for the surface water flood risk for Kirklees, so that's going to be a good lead-in for us. I mean, one of the pictures here is actually Calder View. I mean, we do work with the EA as often as we can. We do put the pressure on them to work with residents in Mirfield. But quite often, you know, if a property is not internally flooded, it doesn't seem to meet the eligibility criteria for them, which is a constant challenge. And I understand now that the central government is now looking at that criteria and moving it so that businesses can benefit from these flood incidents. And with community engagement, yeah, I mean, this is certainly something we're picking up from Mirfield. We'd include them, and we'll include any of the community that's been affected by the incidents.
Just going on to developers' responsibility, we've all got a responsibility, I feel, in terms of managing the planning system, managing growth. Where developers are applying for planning permission, we expect them to put in the right level of information, the detailed level of information, and we will apply our professional judgment, our challenge, our scrutiny, and then we will bring it forward to members with a recommendation, and we'll explain how we've arrived at that. So I'm quite comfortable that we do challenge back and we are improving schemes as they come through. Could developers be more collaborative? Yes, of course they could. But equally, we are in a plan-led situation. And I go back to this point so repeatedly that actually some developments can improve drainage of unregulated sites. So where we've got some examples of the site that Councillor Bolt's alluded to, a housing allocation, it is a challenging site. I identified it as a challenging site. We had data from the 2015 flood storm event from the Boxing Day exercise, so we knew that before we put forward the allocation of land for housing, and the EA were aware of that information. So we do know that the site has an element of flood risk about it at the access point, but the majority of the site where the housing is going, that can be designed to be out of the flood zones with the appropriate design. So they are difficult. There is no doubt that some parts of our borough have challenging topography, have challenging water networks, and we have to respond with clever, innovative designs because we still have to deliver our requirements to give people good quality housing and jobs. So it is difficult. What I would like to just finish on and say is that we are very keen to ensure that developers build in accordance with their planning permission. And where they don't, we will take action to regularise that.
So I think, if I pick up on the points we've made, sandbags, you mentioned about sandbags being only part of the solution, but I think we were looking to be more proactive in that there are places where people know they can get some help if they need help, and certainly we were asking for depots for sandbags. I mean, people are able to ask for grit in rather than grit bins. They're able to ask for grit in the winter if they're in a particular area which is needed for a particular topography. So why not sandbags as well? Why not have, if you're in a particular flood risk area, why not have designated places that can provide support very quickly? Yeah, just bagging a gate, yeah. So that when we have areas of high flood risk, that we actually have things in place where people can go quickly for that support. And you talked about flood wardens as well, and I think that works in other areas, doesn't it? So we need to put that in place as quickly as we can. About the surface water reduction, talking to councillors on how that is working, looking at the topography and engaging councillors with that. Your communication, having better communication, resilience with communication in an emergency, and also working with communities who are the most affected across Kirklees. I think really important that we engage with communities across Kirklees that are most at risk. And enforcement, enforcing where we know there are flood risks, that wherever they are in the borough, that we know that the risk is mitigated. And I actually was surprised as well that in your action plan there is not as much of a risk mitigation. There's actions and there's assessments and there's how you'll measure success, etc., and your planned activities, but there isn't really a appraisal of your risk mitigation in areas of high flood risk. And I would have thought that could have been useful to undertake as well. Okay, have I covered all the points? Yeah, thank you very much. We will close the formal meeting now. The panel is going to move into an informal meeting. So can I just ask, please, that everybody who is not involved in that all formal meeting can move quickly out of the council chamber so that we can move quickly, because we've had two officers waiting very patiently since 2 o'clock for the informal